The racial gap in student achievement is often connected with the racial gap between students and teachers. That explains efforts to make the hiring and search process for new teachers more inclusive. But a new policy brief from the Rappaport Institute at the Harvard Kennedy School says the problem might have more to do with incentives and barriers that make the talent pool itself disproportionately white. Our guest is the co-author of the brief, a doctoral candidate in public policy at the Kennedy School, Melanie Rucinski. Thank you very much for being with us, Melanie.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, what about the notion that having a better match racially between students and teachers is good for education? What do we know about that?
There's a lot of evidence, several papers done by some great people showing that when minority students have minority teachers, they tend to do better not only in terms of test scores, but also in terms of high school graduation and attendance, these sort of longer term non-test score outcomes. So we have some really great just empirical work stretching back for decades people have been doing.
And of course, as far as the mismatch itself, Boston, like a lot of urban systems, it's a more extreme version. You know, I think in Boston, I think it's more than 80% students of color, but roughly 40% teachers of color. So is that typical of the whole country, really?
Yes, that's typical. So actually, in the country as a whole, the K-12 student population is about 50% white, and teachers are about 80% white. And in the state of Massachusetts, that gap actually looks a little bit worse, or students are about 60% white, so they're a little bit less diverse than the country as a whole, but teachers are about 87% white, so much less diverse than students. So I think actually Boston stacks up a little bit better compared to the country than the state as a whole does.
Well, of course, for years and years, we've been telling people in Boston to be better about recruitment. So you send recruiters out, they look at the talent pool. What about that talent pool? What's it like, actually, racially?
Sure. So what we find in our work is actually that the pool of people who seem to be interested in becoming teachers in Massachusetts who are taking the certification test is much less diverse than the pool of college students in the state. So college enrollees in Massachusetts are about 65% white, but if you look at the pool of college students who are actually taking this teacher certification test, they're about 85% white. So where that recruitment is happening is going to really affect how diverse the teachers you're attracting are. If you only start with this pool of people who are taking the licensure test, you're already losing a lot of diversity. So what we find is that recruitment kind of has to go back one step earlier to looking at why are minority students in college choosing to take other career paths and not choosing to go into teaching.
Now, is this about decisions about what courses to take in college, or is this about maybe an encounter with the licensing hurdles and saying, wait, this is tougher than I thought it was going to be, maybe I should do something else? Which of those two do you think it is?
Unfortunately, we can't actually see very much about what courses students are taking, what types of programs they're enrolling in. So that's definitely something we hope to look at in future work. Like, is this something where minority candidates aren't even enrolling in like an education major? Or is it that they enroll, but then they choose to drop out and take other pathways in college? Like, we can't exactly see at which point within the college pipeline these students are choosing another path.
Well, one of the things that your report looks at is what happens when college students who might want to be teachers take the licensing test for communications and literature. There's a racial gap there. Talk about that.
Yes, so we find, first of all, as I mentioned, that the pool of students taking this test is much less diverse than college students in the state. And then we also find that there are some racial gaps in passing the test. So Black, Hispanic, and Asian candidates who are taking this test are much less likely to pass it than white candidates are. And we also find that even though candidates are able to retake the test as many times as they want until they pass, minority candidates are actually retaking the test at lower rates than white candidates. So this results in a gap where even minority candidates and white candidates who get exactly the same scores the first time they take the test, white candidates are still more likely to pass it in the end because they're more likely to retake it if they fail the first time.
Now, it occurs to me with a lot of things in life, if you take some more time and give it another try, you can eventually succeed. But you're a college student, you got to pay off loans, the clock is ticking. Maybe that's not so easy to do, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely part of it. And these tests cost money to take. So certainly if you're already paying tuition, if you're enrolled in school, you don't have an income, there might be these barriers to taking the test in additional time, even if you would like to.
We're talking with Melanie Rucinski from the Harvard Kennedy School. Melanie, what about ideas to at least increase the odds of getting a more diverse talent pool? What do you think can be done about that?
So this is definitely something we hope to explore in future work. I think certainly as whenever you're trying to attract anyone into the teaching profession, you have to look at the working conditions and the pay, how it compares to other career options that these students might have. And this is something that not a lot of research has explored and that we haven't really gotten the data to explore yet. But it's a ripe area for future work.
Of course, one of the things your policy brief mentions is that you have to think big here. This is also not just about these licensing tests. This is about just the whole rate of success for high school graduates, college graduates. There's a lot of people that could be involved that way, couldn't there? Yeah,
so one thing that was interesting about this brief is that we find that college students in Massachusetts demographically look very similar to K-12 students in the state, at least in terms of race. And students tend to take this test, this certification test, fairly early on in college, which means that any racial gaps in college graduation are actually not going to hugely affect who's able to take this certification test. So our results suggest that this isn't really a story, although certainly these racial gaps in educational attainment do exist. They can't fully explain this gap we see at the start of the pipeline, where even students who have managed to enroll in college are for some reason choosing not to take this test.
Now, of course, one of the first things I thought of here was, well, there are other options out there, especially if you're heading into the STEM fields, but that would go for anybody. So what do you think is accounting for the difference?
I wish I could tell you. And this is a gap that is observed not just in Massachusetts, but actually nationally. People have found that minority students are much less likely to go into teaching than their white counterparts. And I don't think we have a good understanding yet of why that happens. I think certainly some of it may have to do with the fact that these students may be more likely to be low income. It may be more necessary for them to take a higher paying profession. But we don't know a lot. And I think that's definitely something that I am interested in looking into.
We should mention that people want to see more of your report itself. You've got this online, so what's the best way to go look for that?
Yes, this is online at the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston website. This is a center at the Kennedy School that has supported this work.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Melanie Rucinski from the Harvard Kennedy School. We'll have more news in just a moment.